On May 4, 2026, the President of the United States announced that the most powerful navy on Earth was going to force open a gap of water 21 miles wide. He called it Operation Project Freedom. It lasted one day. By the time Trump paused the operation on May 5, 2026, 7 Iranian boats had been sunk. A French cargo ship had been hit, and the real reason it stopped had nothing to do with Iran. Saudi Arabia, America's closest ally in the region, had looked at the plan and quietly locked the door. They denied access to their airspace. They denied access to their bases. A phone call between Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince failed to change their minds. The nation the United States has armed and protected for decades had decided that Project Freedom was not well thought out and could spiral into something nobody could control. And that was it. The operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz was over almost before it began. To understand why this happened, you have to understand what led up to it. In the weeks before Project Freedom, Iran had blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. The same 21-mile gap of water that carries 20 million barrels of oil every day, roughly a fifth of everything the world consumes. The same strait where China gets a third of its oil, Japan gets 70% of its supply, and Qatar's natural gas exits toward Europe. Iran mined it, attacked shipping in it, and suddenly tankers full of crude worth billions of dollars were just sitting in the Gulf, anchored and going nowhere. Oil surged past $126 a barrel. Iraq shut down its oil fields because there was nowhere to put the crude. Qatar declared force majeure, a legal term that means we cannot fulfill our contracts because the world has changed. The International Energy Agency released the largest emergency oil reserve in its history. It bought 4 days. The United States responded with overwhelming force. Over several weeks, US forces dropped 5,000-pound bunker-buster bombs on hardened Iranian anti-ship missile sites dug into the coastline along the strait. They sank 16 Iranian mine layers while Iran was still trying to scatter mines into the shipping lanes. By April, Trump announced that the US military had destroyed 158 Iranian naval vessels across 16 different warship classes. Every Iranian submarine had been sunk. He declared the Iranian Navy annihilated and lying at the bottom of the sea. Only a few small, fast attack boats remained. If you looked at the numbers, the path should have been clear. The enemy navy was gone. The missile sites were destroyed. The mines were being cleared. The strait was, in purely military terms, openable. 23,000 civilians from 87 countries were stranded on ships in the Persian Gulf, their food and water running down, their crews unable to leave and unable to go forward. Someone had to get them out. So on May 4th, Trump announced Project Freedom. US Navy guided missile destroyers would form a protective corridor through the Strait of Hormuz. Merchant ships would follow them through. The warships go first. The cargo ships follow. The blockade breaks. Simple. And initially it appeared to work. 2 American-flagged merchant ships successfully transited through the strait. A vessel belonging to Danish shipping giant Maersk crossed with a US military escort. Secretary of State Marco Rubio framed the operation as a humanitarian mission to save thousands of stranded civilians. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called it defensive in nature, focused in scope, and temporary in duration. The words were careful. Defensive, focused, temporary. They were already managing expectations because even as they spoke, things were going wrong. An oil tanker was hit by projectiles in the strait hours after the operation began. Iran claimed it had launched missiles at a US warship and scored hits. The US denied any military vessel was struck, but the message was already in the water. The destroyed Navy still had reach. Those small, fast attack boats everyone had dismissed were swarming, and 7 of them were sunk in the exchanges that followed, but not before a French CMA-CGM cargo ship was targeted and hit, its crew injured, its hull damaged. It had been attempting to cross without Iranian approval. Iran was making a point. You can escort your ships, we can still reach them. Then came the real blow, and it didn't come from Iran. Less than 24 hours after Project Freedom launched, Trump announced it was temporarily paused by mutual agreement, citing progress in ongoing peace negotiations with Iran. The New York Times reported soon after that there was no evidence of any emerging deal. The real reason was Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government had denied the United States access to its airspace and its military bases on Saudi territory because they believed Project Freedom was poorly planned and risked escalating into a wider regional war with Iran directly on their border. A phone call between Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince failed to resolve the disagreement. The country whose territory is essential infrastructure for every US military operation in the Gulf had simply said no. The most powerful military in the world was grounded by its closest ally. The cover story was mutual agreement. The reality was that the door was locked from the inside. And even if the airspace problem had been solved, there was another problem that no destroyer in the world could fix. Lloyd's List, the shipping industry authority, reported that ship owners and insurers said the US operation had not given them sufficient clarity or credible protection to justify resuming transits. This was the trap. The exact trap. The Navy could clear the shipping lane. It could escort every tanker through with guns bristling. It could not make an underwriter in a grey office building in London write an insurance policy on a vessel sailing through an active war zone. The lane is open. We have ships in the strait. My captains won't go through it. We'll escort them. Who insures them if they don't make it? Without insurance, no commercial captain on Earth sails. Without commercial ships moving, the strait stays closed, no matter how many destroyers are in the water. The fighting did not even stop during the so-called pause. On May 7th, 3 US Navy destroyers transited the strait and traded fire with Iranian forces. Iranian bases at Bandar Abbas and Qeshm were struck. In response, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait both temporarily restricted US access to bases on their territory. The operation designed to reopen the strait was actively making it more closed. Every shot fired gave the insurance market another reason to stay away. Every Iranian response gave allies another reason to distance themselves. The plan was not just failing, it was generating the conditions for its own failure. And through all of this, the people with the most to lose had the least power to do anything about it. 23,000 civilians from 87 countries were still stranded in the Gulf, floating on ships that could neither dock nor exit, watching their supplies dwindle. 26 South Korean cargo ships were sitting off the coast, their cargoes undelivered, their crews waiting. A Panamanian-flagged vessel owned by a Korean shipping company had already been struck by an explosion and caught fire. South Korea announced it was reviewing its potential participation in the operation. Reviewing. While 26 of its ships sat stranded and its economy, which runs almost entirely on imported energy through this strait, absorbed the cost. Japan, Taiwan, India, entire economies built on oil that comes through this one gap of water, all watching a one-day operation that couldn't survive 24 hours of contact with reality. Project Freedom was supposed to prove that overwhelming military force could solve a geography problem. Instead, it proved the opposite. It proved that some problems cannot be bombed, cannot be escorted, and cannot be forced open by the biggest guns in the world. The strait has been contested for 500 years. Empires have tried to control this water. Navies have tried to force it open. The tankers eventually move again. They always do. But not because anyone forces them through. Because the leverage eventually works both ways, and the door opens on its own terms, the geography does not change. The insurance math does not change. And the countries that depend on this water most remain the ones with no territory here, no claim to this passage, and no practical way to change any of it.